Thanks for the introduction. I'll start by giving you a little bit more about who I am, and I'll go into it in a second. But I'm sorry I missed the last speaker, but I did read the blurb on his book, like all good publishers do, and so now I know exactly what the book's about. But even the blurb inspired me because he seemed to be really talking about overcoming fear, among other things, when one manages or when one does whatever one does. And let me tell you, I'm kind of fearful right now speaking in front of a group. Even though I've done it dozens of times, it never fails to make me nervous, which I think in some ways is a good thing. You know, the great basketball player Bill Russell said he never went into a game without throwing up first in the locker room. Luckily, I didn't have to do that in my room, but fear's a motivator sometimes. It's usually a short-term one. But I will tell you just a little brief story. What Kent didn't tell you in my biography is that I decided to go back to school rather late in life to finish a degree that I'd never finished when I was a young person. I dropped out of college when I was 19 or 20 in 1970 to do other things and to sort of be out in the world, and promised my mother that I'd go back in 3 months. And 43 years passed. And I had a chance while I was the CEO of Abrams to enter a program at Yale University called the Eli Whitney Students Program, the Scholars Program, and I went back to school. It took me 7 years to finish a degree, and 45 years later I graduated with a BA in history from Yale University, which was a lot of fun but really scary to go into a classroom just about every day with people. And this was not extension school or night school. I had to go actually show up. It took me 7 years because I was doing 1 or 2 classes a week during the semester, but to show up with people who were younger than my own children. And invariably, when the class started, the first week of class, they would sit there. I was always early, of course, and sit there and wait for me to start to talk because they just assumed that I was a professor. And I said, no, it's not me. But the beauty part of it was Yale. My parents didn't pay $25,000 to the swimming coach to say that I should get in. So I earned it. But among other things, I got to go to any number of classes. And as my dean, because you do get a dean at Yale, even if you're an old person like me, who's now become a great friend of mine, when I would go to him for academic advice, he said, Michael, at your age, eat dessert first. Go to the classes you really want to go to and do the math and science and the language later, which of course I did have to do. And let me tell you, trying to learn a new language when you're 61 years old is not easy. I can hardly remember people's names, let alone how to conjugate verbs. But among the classes I took with the School of Management at Yale was a class called Leading Through Adversity that was co-taught by a guy called Jeffrey Sonnenberg, who's a big-time CEO expert, and a guy called Tom Kolditz, who was actually a professor and also an officer at West Point. And among the things that Kolditz did, and they sort of co-taught this class, was he was the coach of the skydiving team at West Point. And so he had this analogy where he would say, leading is really about being out there on the edge and being scared all the time, but not necessarily not showing that you're scared. You can be vulnerable, but you actually do have to, sort of project out. And he would always have this analogy that, it's sort of like standing on the edge of an airplane, getting ready to jump out when you don't really have to jump out. The plane isn't crashing. So he would always get these kids who were on the skydiving team, and he would basically say to them, you have to get to the edge. And, rather than, what one tends to be scared is sort of, going inward, you put yourself out like this, and you project out into the world and just, oh shit, here I go, and you're out into the world. And so that analogy, I think, sort of does work a lot for overcoming fear. Is like, you're putting yourself out there. You're sort of going to be open to what happens rather than to sort of externalize it. So here I am. I hope I don't bore you too much. There's very little caloric content in this presentation, but we'll see what you glean from it. And I'm going to tell you a few things. So first of all, I'm going to tell you who the hell I am and what qualifies me to opine about this subject. About Abrams, the company I run and have run for the last 15 years, and its evolution. according to the state, as I see it, for the book business, the trade book business in particular, which is my area of expertise if I have one. Why books need to be books, which is my favorite part of this presentation and is just a lot of my opinion really, but some things, and we could sort of toss that around for a while. Other people's sort of blue sky and sort of blue ocean palaver about the business and where it's going. A wing, a prayer, and a poem. I am involved in a poetry organization. I never have a presentation to my own company or any other presentation I've ever make when I don't incorporate a poem, just because it makes me feel better. So I hope it's not too boring for you. And then golf, which I'm very interested in, and I will hopefully be on the course by about 2 o'clock with some of my friends, and see you tomorrow. And then questions or comments. So, all right. So let's jump in here. Speaking of poets, this guy was around for a while, so I think this is absolutely true. Everything always changes, but nothing really is lost. We always retain and morph things, the metamorphosis, which he wrote about. I think that's a good thing to remember, that everything does change, but nothing is ever really lost. This is me in the 70s, there, the guy with the beard and the hair. I worked at a independently owned, employee-owned book distributor in Berkeley, California called Book People, which is now defunct. I worked in the warehouse, and the big news was when you got to actually drive the truck to the post office. That was sort of freedom. I then got on the board of directors and convinced them they needed their first outside salesperson, which is sort of my entry into selling books, which is how my career started. I still know some of those people, including the guy in the back with his hand raised. His name is Roger Fox. Whenever I chide my now 30-year-old son about having too much hair, he says, "But how about you, Dad?" So anyway, this was 1976. And Book People was known as a place, because it was employee-owned, that everybody got the same salary when you joined. So you got $6,000, free lunch, and all the dope you could smoke. So everything changes, nothing is lost, right? I went on the road for Book People and then got a job as a Penguin rep, working for then Viking Penguin, before it was Penguin Random House. And I had the greatest territory in North America: Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Alaska. This is in a place called Hungry Horse, Montana, where I and many friends of mine who were book reps used to plan our trips together on the road. So a little less facial hair, but still the hair on top. And of course, what we said is, you never trusted anyone over 30. I think I was 31 or 32 and on the way to selling out, which I did. Came back to New York in 1984 to become the assistant sales manager at Penguin, working for a woman there named Brenda Marsh, who maybe some of you know, who then later in life worked for me, and just as retired from running our UK joint venture sales and marketing operation. She was an amazing boss for me. Of course, as every young, aggressive executive to be knows, when you get into the office, of course, the first thing you want to do is have a better title, right? It really mattered to you, at least it mattered to me a lot, what my title was, and they could have given me a better title and reduced my salary. It mattered that much. And Brenda had the wisdom of the ages of basically saying, "Michael, no one will ever respect you more because of what your title is. They'll only respect you because the way you act and how you comport yourself," which I think is absolutely true in management and in many things in life. So this was at Viking Penguin. That was our sales team. She was the sales manager. I was the field sales manager. So, and now I work for a French company, so I get to philosophize. This is me in Paris working. I don't know what I'm explaining here, but I look very serious about it, don't I? Anyway, so let me tell you a little bit about. Well, this is true too, I think. And this is not over. This is John Wooden, the great basketball coach from UCLA. It's sort of, after you think you know everything, that's when you really begin to learn. So let me tell you a little bit about Abrams. Abrams was founded by this fellow who looks a lot like Lloyd Bridges to me. His name was Harry Abrams, Harry Nathan Abrams. He founded Abrams in 1949 after the war to be the first U.S. publisher of high-end art and design books. And he had an amazing marketing background, actually. He worked for Book of the Month Club in the 30s and 40s and was kind of a marketing genius. Started this company in 1949 and really did something that no other US-based publisher did at that point in time. Published books from all over the world, and especially from Europe, about art and about artists. And that was the tradition of Abrams for most of its life and still is. We could argue with some morphing. Everything changes, but nothing being lost. So Harry founded the company in 1949. In 1966, it was acquired by the Times Mirror Company. If any of you were around in those days, newspaper companies especially were particularly interested in book publishers. In this case, it was mostly because the chairman of the board's wife liked art. Harry Abrams was a very prestigious company, made some money or didn't make any money, but Times Mirror was a sort of a media conglomerate, if you will, at that point in time, and they bought Abrams in 1966 and held on to it for almost 30 years until it was bought by a company called the La Martiniere Group, which is eponymous group run by this fellow here called Hervé de La Martiniere, who'd founded his own company in France and had a big success with a book called Earth from Above, which sold about 1 million copies, an aerial photography book by a guy called Jan Artus Bertrand. And with that money, Hervé started his own company and then bought Abrams, really, let's not call it out of bankruptcy, but it was a pretty distressed company. I think he bought it for under $30 million, including a property called the Jansen's History of Art, which was the art history book that all colleges adopted, and they turned around and sold that to Pearson, who was its distributor, for $5 or $6 million. So, I mean, at the end of the day, Abrams was sort of a bargain, and La Martiniere held on to it for quite a long time. I joined in 2004. As Ken said, after about 7.5 years at Scholastic, where I had sort of overseen the marketing and sales of the trade division and the logistics as well, especially on the publication, marketing, and laydown of the first 5 Harry Potter books, which one could argue sort of changed the book business, not because of me, but because of the books. And because of J.K. Rowling, who created a generation of readers and dispelled the notion that children or young adults wouldn't read 800-page books in 2 days, which they did. Those kids are now having kids of their own, and the other thing that the Harry Potter books did is it created a market, really, for what used to be called juvenile books, children's books, that has, in fact, for the last 20-some years, led the rest of the trade publishing business and continues to do so. So that was a fun ride, not without its stresses, but I learned a lot. And being strictly on the kids side of the business, which Scholastic is, not just in its trade publishing, but in its distribution in schools through its book fairs and book clubs, was an interesting thing to do, sort of a parallel universe. Again, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. I thought I knew everything about trade publishing until I went into children's publishing and realized I knew nothing about children's publishing. So it was a tremendous experience for me to sort of get to know a whole new set of rules and a whole new set of people, authors, illustrators, and the way in which kids' books worked. So I joined Abrams in 2004. At that point in time, we were sort of overstaffed, non-profitable, non-unified company in 2 offices, and it was pretty clear to me what the work was that needed to be done. And my time at Scholastic had been preceded by 3.5 very long years at Simon & Schuster, which was a tough place to be then and now, but also good, and the 13 years at Penguin, where I had gone from being a sales rep to coming into the office and running a division there. So that was my experience when I joined. So, and then in 2018, just 2 years ago, Hervé Le Martiniere, who looks a lot older now than he did then, his company, Le Martiniere, was bought by a company called Media Participation in Paris, and so Abrams became part of this larger company, which is now probably about the 30th largest trade publishing company in the world. third or fourth in France, has a market share of about 30%, especially in comics and graphic novels in Belgium and France and Europe. And Abrams is its single largest holding, which I'm very proud of now. And they're kind of hard asses, but they're really good business people and pretty straightforward, which is nice for a French person. They actually tell you what they think rather than what they think they want you to know. This is a guy called Vincent Montagna, whose father founded the company in the early 90s. His father had been a French politician, and then when he retired, he started a publishing company with, among other things, money from Michelin, because he's married to one. So that's also the way things happen in France, you know. You make money the old-fashioned way, you inherit it, you know. So, but anyway, nice company, happy to have Abrams, and happy to fuel our growth both organically and hopefully through acquisition. We made our first acquisition about 1.5 years ago, a small company called the Overlook Press, and we hope more to come because we have an aggressive growth plan. Okay, so our publishing philosophy, in short, I'm just trying to get it onto one slide. Basically, that the book has always been more than a vehicle for curating and publishing text to us, as we've also been for much of our history committed to the visual, to images, to art, to design and production of a high standard. All that and more make books objets d'art for us. They're actually sacred objects in some way, but also objects that people cherish for all kinds of reasons. Plus, we've become much more eclectic. We now have a tagline that's called The Art of Books, so we still have art in our sort of mission. But we also embrace the flexibility, publishing big, fat, oversized tomes about things like Art Deco or small sort of fun books like a board book on the Lego art of New York by Christoph Niemann and everything in between. When I joined the company, we were just sort of launching our kids business in 2004. We'd hired an editor to publish fiction for children. We did not at that point in time publish fiction for anyone, and that's sort of changed the company, including this little baby here, which is now the most successful middle grade series in the world, and I can say that without real hyperbole. Published in more than 65 countries around the world in 72 languages, 230 million copies in print, and still going strong since 2007. Jeff Kinney's Wimpy Kid books as a series have spent one more successive week on the New York Times bestseller list than Harry Potter, 554 weeks I think it is now. And you better be damn sure that I better keep it on the bestseller list, because Jeff is very proud of the fact that it's been on the bestseller list continuously longer than Harry Potter. In any case, it's been a joy and a pleasure and hard work, and we focus on it all day in every way. And I dare say it's helped some of the people in this audience on the manufacturing and on the paper side, on hopefully on the hope side for how books can turn kids into readers, and more than that, keep the business healthy and flowing, and certainly has had a big impact on our company in those same ways. Nothing succeeds like success, right? People want to be involved with successful things, and I'm happy to say that Jeff launched sort of a sub-series, first of which was this Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid, which released in the spring, because we usually release Wimpy Kid books in the fall. So now he's got a spring release, and he's just agreed to do book 2 in this series in spring 2020. And if it keeps going, we'll hopefully have 2 Wimpy Kid books a year, which will be good, obviously, for our friends in Stevens Point, and for our paper suppliers, and for lots of other folks along down the line. And I'm also happy to say that next Tuesday, this new number 14 in the narrative series releases with a 3 million copy first printing in North America. That's trade and scholastic, and that's not a BS number. That's actually a real number, and we'll probably go back to press again pre-publication or shortly thereafter. So that's obviously changed our company. Now our Wimpy Kid business is comprises 1/3 of our company's turnover. So 1/3 on Wimpy Kid, 1/3 of our core children's publishing, which 15 years ago didn't exist, and 1/3 of our sort of traditional, historic, illustrated, upmarket adult publishing, which we're now diversifying as well to include narrative nonfiction and text. We launched an imprint a couple years ago called Abrams Press, where we're doing narrative nonfiction. And through our Overlook Press acquisition, we're going to be doing fiction for adults as well. So we continue to grow in the ways in which we can. And it's actually nice, like many of you, to be an independent entity and to have growth and innovation across your organization. Okay. So I will make an admission here that these were borrowed from your executive director, who forwarded me some info that he'd shared with the group. The state of the state, this is through the Association of American Publishers. So announced that publishing revenue for the first 6 months of 2019 was up 6.9%. Trade, which is the area that we're most involved in, net revenue for paper formats, including hardback, paperback, mass, and board, grew 2.5% as compared to the first 6 months of the prior year. $2.5 billion, and paper formats accounted for about 72% of all reported sales during the first 6 months of the year. Ebook revenues actually flat to down. This seems to be the case across the industry, down 3 to 4%. For our own business at Abrams, where we mostly do visual books and kids books, ebooks represent less than 1% of our business. I wish it actually could be higher, because you can well imagine the margins are quite healthy and nice. So part of our text strategy is in fact to increase our ebook margin as much as anything else. And of course the sort of the hot goer these days is downloaded audio, which is having double-digit growth, 25 to 35% growth, and reached about almost a $300 million business. And physical audio declined, no surprise there. And unlike the book, I guess once you have bits and bytes on going in your ears, you don't really need even a CD or anything else. But books seem to have weathering that storm, at least as far as I'm concerned. So again, not surprisingly, children and young adult books were up 7.4% over the same period the prior year. Adult books increased 1.4%, so I think 1 to 2% is probably the new normal, and I think it's flat, but flat is okay in that regard. Religious was up 11.4%, and professional publishing 1.1%. I'm sure education was down pretty severely, but I don't have the stats here. So probably none of that's surprising to you. I think it's kind of a good picture. It's not the most rosy picture, but it's a good picture. But generally speaking, the long-term trend for books is probably flat. You see 13 to 18, marginal growth, compound annual growth rate of less than 1%, of about 1/10%. So I guess, flat is the new up, but better than being down, right? So the good news under the good news is that, demand is up, especially in kids' books. What you guys do in technology and the performance of what you do makes a difference. Improving the quality using the technology is a good thing. And I would posit there are new readers, especially kids, and there are new markets, probably more international and emerging markets than here. But it's still amazing how few of our population really buy books. But I think they're still there to be approached. Challenging, you know this better than me, on the challenging side, labor and labor costs. Government, especially tariffs, and what's going to happen with them is pretty hard to figure out, and we have to sort of build that in, at least into the near-term pricing. The trade wars in general are hard to predict. Brexit, especially for those of us who sell into the UK and the export markets across Europe through the UK. No one knows what the hell's going on there, including the Brits, one of whom I spoke to this morning. In the near term, they think it actually may be good because they're delaying it now until January, which means that maybe their retailers will order up in anticipation. And the new normal is more on demand and just-in-time printing than longer lead times. I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't already know. But here's the fun stuff. So why do I think, at least, that books still need to be books as physical objects? Well, I think the first and foremost thing is because the technology, the book, it actually still works. It's still portable. You can hold on to it, right? And it works. I was once on a panel with somebody in the nascent days of ebooks who basically said, this is, transforming the whole world, and, it's completely portable. And I looked at them and I thought, well, last time I looked, I actually could carry my books around if I really wanted to. Maybe not that 1,200-page tome, but books are actually portable, and it's a technology that for thousands of years has worked and continues to work. They continue to evolve that technology from cuneiform, from writing on tablets all the way to bits and bytes, and with type, both hot and movable type in between. The technology keeps evolving, but the book itself hasn't disappeared. Because as objects, they actually have some power and heft and volume and substance and what the Buddhists would call thingness. They are a thing, and they actually have a reason to exist because they have substance. And they're, I would posit, talismanic. They're iconic. They're markers of value, and they serve as a cultural currency. Books work, and books need to be books because they actually have words in them. And some of the first incarnations of books, as you well know, if you've studied the history of printing, were meant to contain the word. Bibles, the Quran, things that actually passed on sacred wisdom from one person to another. And books deserve and need to be books because they do impart knowledge, they entertain, they enlighten, and they influence. The speaker previously, and probably every speaker and every person who goes on television or radio or wants to market themselves has a book. A politician has a book because it actually gives them some platform to actually be an authority, right? They're an external memory, books. Books are an external memory for our collective and our individual singular histories, right? Books are places in time, and they get passed on from generation to generation. And I'd also posit that they're a democratizing factor in the world. When new culture, new economies emerge, one of the things that helps them become more democratic is books, is the distribution of knowledge through books. And it wasn't that long ago that books were only for rich people. The only people who could afford books were people who had money. The only people who could have books made for them were people who had money, and that's not the case. It hasn't been the case for about 150 years. So actually the democratizing thing is only in its beginning now, and I'd posit. So books remind us of places and of times when things of great import or small import happened, where you were when you read that book, who gave that book to you, what effect it had on you, and what it was. Because our language has evolved to include books sort of as a metaphor. We turn the page and we close the book on that chapter, and there are 100 more of them that books actually are sort of central metaphorically to the way in which we see our lives, that they're a beginning, a middle, and an end to lots of things. Because books, as I said before, have authority, they give authority, and because the whole notion of being an author is about being an expert, having authority, having a voice, having a position that is to be at least listened to or read about or heard, sometimes maybe beyond your real influence, but the authority of books, I would say, give them even more power. Because obviously they're a source of creation, origination, invention. This is my favorite thing because we read them to our kids, and our children will read them to their children, and because eventually our children want to read them themselves. Those 3 or 4 things in themselves make books worth being books in my view, because there's nothing like reading to your child, there's nothing like your child wanting you to read to them, and there is nothing short of a few other milestones in life that are more heartening as a parent, to my view, than when your children begin to read for themselves and where that journey takes them, even if they struggle with it. And I have one child who's an amazingly adept reader and one child who's a struggling reader, and both of them reading either physically or now through audiobooks have changed their lives. And books are a currency in which they talk to each other about all kinds of things, and their friends and us. So, books do change lives, and they change children's lives, and making children into readers is important work. I'd say maybe the most important work I do in my professional life. So the other thing is that they're perfect gifts. They're great gifts for others because they actually indicate that you thought about what somebody else might be interested in. And let's face it, they're pretty good gifts for yourself. When you're feeling down, when you want to learn something, when you think you want to lose weight, when your golf swing sucks, whatever it is, or you just want to be entertained, you want to go somewhere else, buying a book for yourself is actually an act of self-care, right? It's important. It is a gift that is important. And to my business, this is quite important. Books look good, They look good in a room. They look good on a table. They look good on your bookshelves. They even look good in retailers that don't sell books. I don't know if you've noticed this trend or not. For those of you who are shoppers and shop in anthropology or elsewhere, one of the things they decorate with is books. And we have whole groups of people in our sales organization called special market salespeople who are selling books in part for those retailers to sell, but in part they're selling those books so those books will sit on shelves to be able to sell dresses and shoes and tchotchkes and other things. So actually books as furniture, as decorating objects is one of their values, and I don't undervalue that. And in short, because books are magic, and you don't have to believe me to believe that, but here's what Carl Sagan, some of you remember Carl Sagan from that amazing television program called Cosmos, when he did a bit on the Library of Alexandria, and this is what he said: "What an astonishing thing a book is. It's a flat object made from a tree with flexible parts in which are imprinted lots of funny dark squiggles. One glance at it and you're inside the mind of another person, maybe somebody dead for thousands of years. Across a millennia, an author is speaking clearly and silently inside your head, directly to you. Writing is perhaps the greatest of human inventions, binding together people." It's a good word, binding together people. It's part of what you do too, who never knew each other, citizens of distant epochs. Books break the shackles of time. A book is proof that humans are capable of working magic. I think that's pretty powerful, and it seems to me to be true. Okay, so just don't believe me and Carl Sagan. This is William Blake. So I was in London recently, and I went to see this amazing exhibition at the Tate Britain on William Blake, who was kind of a mad genius, who started actually as a printer, an engraver. He was part of your trade, but he also was an artist and a poet and a visionary. And actually, I think what is happening there is, whether this is God or somebody from heaven actually putting power into a book. And Blake, among other things, said the following: "Reader, lover of books, lover of heaven, and of that God from whom all books are given, who in mysterious Sinai's awful cave to man the wondrous art of writing gave. Again he speaks in thunder and in fire, thunder of thought and flames of fierce desire. Even from the depths of hell his voice I hear, within the unfathomed caverns of my ear. Therefore I print, nor vain my types shall be. Heaven, earth, and hell henceforth shall live in harmony." I think you should actually have a William Blake Prize for your industry. He's an amazing visionary who still speaks across the ages in all kinds of media, art, but he at heart was a lithographer, a printer, and an engraver, and spent lots of time in printing presses. He said, "I was in a printing press in hell and saw the method in which knowledge is transmitted from generation to generation." I'm sure printing presses were a lot more difficult places to work in Blake's day than they are now, but you probably can appreciate his metaphorical quality here. So, anyway, so let's not just listen to myself and Sagan and William Blake, but the guy who runs the biggest trade publisher in the world, Marcus Dolan, Penguin Random House, who probably have a 30+% market share in North America. And he, at the end of the first day of the Frankfurt Book Fair this year, had a little cocktail party outside his booth, and I saw the write-up from Publishers Weekly, and this is what Marcus said. He said, "Who would have thought in 2019 that 80% of our Penguin Random House's global distribution is in physical formats, and that has stabilized the entire book ecosystem. Top of that, our audience is growing every year, literacy rates are growing, more people on the planet who can read, children's books are going through the roof," Dolan said. These are the facts, he stressed, the truth about the industry. So let's change the image of this industry. Industry deserves so much better. Dolan proclaimed that this is the best time for publishing since Gutenberg. Well, he may be hyperbolic. I see some of you smirking. He did have a Heineken in his hand. Maybe he'd had more than one. But let's also look back a little bit. Not even that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, the great, whatever that thing was, recession. You know, the advent of the ebook, digital technology at the same time as the world economies came crashing down and publishers and everybody else had to cut staffs. So if you had asked a group of people 10 years ago about the future of the book, what would they have said? Well, I found out what some of them said. There was a survey. So this is in contrast to what received as gospel just 10 years earlier at the self-same large gathering of international publishers of Frankfurt Book Fair. In 2008 survey, some 1,000 industry professionals queried, said, digital content will overtake traditional printed book sales by 2018. Now it looks like it may be sooner than that, industry consultant and pundit Mike Shatskin. Do anybody know Mike Shatskin? Wonderful guy. He told the Frankfurt Book Fair Daily after a morning slot confab in Hall 8, which is where the English-speaking publishers at the Book Messe used to live. He talked about a conference he was selling called Digital Book World in January of that year, in which his firm was an organizer. So it may even be sooner than 10 years that we don't really need print books. And a sales executive, a publishing and marketing executive, who I happen to know, but I won't share his name with you now, actually opined, once a reader makes a decision to read on a device, he noted, that customer is basically lost to print. That guy doesn't work in the business anymore. So enough said. Because I'd posit that it ain't an either and or, it's a both. And it never was an either. If you read, you read. And I know countless numbers of people who read on their devices, read on their telephones, take those devices with them when they travel because they don't want to schlep, as we say in New York, pounds and pounds of books, but still buy books, still give books as gifts. It's not that sexy to actually give somebody a digital book as a gift. It sort of doesn't feel like you really thought about it that much. It's okay to get an Amazon gift card and all that, and let you buy your own books, but it ain't an either or. It's a both. If you're a reader, you read both ways. And I would also say that if you told me 10 years ago that Random House, the biggest company in the world, would say that 80% of their book sales, their book distribution in the world was physical, I would have said you're smoking a lot of dope, because how could that be? And yet it is, because these things do have power. They are magic. They are a technology that we really haven't improved upon. And that reading, however it happens, that quick reading one does, even when you read a book on a device, I would say to you that, at least in my case, I absorb less. I have no idea where I am in the flow of the book. Doesn't mean I'm not having a good time or where I picked up, but actually the act, the physical act, of finishing a book, of being in a place in a book, even if that stack is really high on your bedside, and finishing it is a satisfying thing to do. Or even deciding I'm going to put it down, I'm going to put it over there, and I'm going to read it when I retire. So 10 years ago, the death knell of the book was all we talked about. And now, well, it still might happen, and there are lots of headwinds blowing against us, but I don't think it's because there are going to be lots more Kindles that the book's going to disappear if it disappears. I don't think it's going to be because people, once they become readers on a device, print is lost to them. That's bullshit. And I think you should know it. And more than that, your own experience, I'm sure over the last 2 to 3 years, where some books have become so big in terms of blockbusterness, if you will, a word I just made up, that capacity, which you guys cut back on, understandably, given the fact that the prognosis for your business, our business, was that we're not going to need that stuff anymore, puts you all of us in a pretty difficult position, right? So there is a better story. And while Marcus maybe, believe in his own PR, the fact is we have a better story to tell. And, still people come up to me and, those kids in Yale, who, when they found out, which I didn't brag about, that I, was involved in the first 5 Harry Potter books, went, they were like, well, you're in a business, you did something that changed our lives. And then other people who I meet, who are usually older, say, well, you're in a dinosaur business. I mean, how much more of a future is there for it? Well, we could argue about how much more of a future is, but what you do, the manufacturing of books has been going on for a long time, and we could argue whether the first book was in 800 or in 1567, but the fact is, it keeps going. So I just got the high sign. It's 5 minutes left, so I'll move on. So I saw that, and Brian's going to talk about this later on. What can publishers and manufacturers do? I think your upcoming book manufacturing mastered class in New York is a wonderful development and a way in which we can work together more. So I commend that. There are all kinds of other things we can do. It's about communication. It's about knowing each other. It's about actually sharing where our business is going and how we can partner as well. All right, so I told you, I read you a couple poems already, so this is Dylan Thomas. I could never have dreamt that there were such goings on in the world between the covers of books, such sandstorms and ice blasts of words, such staggering peace of enormous laughter, such and so many blinding bright lights splashing all over the pages in a million bits and pieces, all of which were words, 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 and each of which were alive forever in its own delight and glory and oddity and light. And just one more, because what's a day without Emily Dickinson? Much more elusive, but much more Emily. So there's no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may be the poorest take without oppressive toil. How frugal is the chariot that bears a human soul. Okay, that's it. Anybody have any questions or comments? I think I'm on time, more or less. Yes, sir.
Michael, you talked a little bit about, obviously you've been involved, whether it's with Wimpy Kids or with the Harry Potter books, but I think one of the biggest fears of growth in the industry is getting those younger people to become readers. Outside of a really good book that can take off, can you talk about what you do in the marketing and the sell, and how do we drive millennials to going to the bookstore and picking up?
I don't think you have a problem with millennials. I think the millennials I know want to read and want to buy books, not every single one, obviously. As far as, growing readers, let them read whatever they want to read. That's my advice. I think when you see the explosive growth in graphic novels and sort of comics for kids, I think that's part of what's driving the growth is, kids want to read, let them read everything. Read the back of cereal boxes. It doesn't matter what you want to read. It's about reading. It's about the love of reading. I mean, on the marketing side, we do all kinds of things. In the beauty part of kids' books, unlike publishing or marketing to adult books, is that librarians and teachers are hugely influential and important. We spend a lot of time, money, and energy focusing on how we encourage librarians, teachers, caregivers to put books into kids' hands, to make recommendations for books in the library or in the classroom. So I think that's one of the great parts about kids' books, is that you actually get to do much more on-the-ground blocking and tackling marketing than you do on the adult side, where sometimes you throw it out into the world and you advertise and you hope that you get buzz going and word of mouth. Kids' books actually have more of a science to them in some way. But as far as reading, let them read whatever they want to read, is my advice. And not everybody wants to let their kids read whatever they want to read. They will go where their interests, take them. And but it's interesting, do kids read more because there are books in the house? Probably, but kids who want to read will read whether there are books in the house or not, as long as they have a library card, as long as they have teachers who encourage them, as long as there are scholastic book clubs or book fairs, or followed book clubs or book fairs where they go. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
One more.
Okay.
Michael, in our last presentation, Rich talked about creating a business in an environment of purpose. Encouraged us to look at past our stakeholders to the actual users of our customer's customer.
Yeah.
And what delights them.
Yeah.
In our products. So I'm not sure, with all your experience, you put a lot of points on the slides of why books are amazing. Are there things that you see your readers pining for, wanting, that we could work on, that would create better books?
It's a great question. I don't know that I have the answer to it. I think one of the things about the Wimpy Kid books that I would say to you, aside from the fact that they're fun and jokes and there's a combination of both text and illustration, comics, is the format, is the way the books look, the tactile feel to them. I think that does make a difference. I think that is a differentiator. I think we invented a format, and many, many other children's publishers now have that paper overboard, sort of tactile look to them. So, keep changing it up in a way, making books look unique and different as objects, I think, is one of the things that you guys do well and you can continue to do well.
You look at that based on the markets, the end markets?
Yeah, well, sometimes we overthink it too. I mean, on the adult side, we want this book to be this big, and excuse me, you don't have a shelf that can accommodate that. You don't even have a box that can ship that from the warehouse. So you can overthink it as well, and sometimes familiarity is what people really do want. A book is a book is a book. But I do think that, sometimes the shape and the feel of a book, covers of books, we spend so much time, designing them and seeing, trying to figure out what is going to appeal to people, what's going to pop off a shelf, what's going to be on the table. So, and we are, fortunately or unfortunately, in most cases, still relying upon retailers, although I won't talk about Amazon. Amazon is the 8,000-pound gorilla, but there are still physical retailers who obviously make a difference in how they display our books, matter a great deal as well.